Hello everyone, welcome to this series on the history of English literature. And in this video, we are going to discuss the modern age and the decadents in poetry. Introduction. The late 19th and early 20th centuries, known as the modern age, were a period of profound transformation in English and Irish literature. This era witnessed a significant shift from the detailed and emotive poetry of the Pre-Raphaelites and their contemporaries to the more aesthetic and ornamental style of the Decadents. Embracing the philosophy of art for art's sake, the Decadents sought to distance themselves from the grim realities of their time, focusing instead on beauty, sensory experience, and aesthetic perfection. Influenced by Walter Pater's aestheticism, the movement naturally progressed from the works of the Pre-Raphaelites, Swinburne, Morris, and Rossetti's, to a new generation of poets who prioritized form and ornamentation over substance. This video explores the evolution of the Decadent movement, highlighting key figures such as Ernest Dowson, Lionel Johnson, W.B. Yeats, Bridges, Rudyard Kipling, and John Masefield. It examines how these poets contributed to the movement, the formation and impact of the Rhymers Club, and the eventual transition to a more vital and positive poetic outlook. The Pre-Raphaelite influence. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, founded in 1848 by poets and artists like William Morris, D.G. Rossetti, and A.C. Swinburne, laid the foundational aesthetic principles that would later influence the Decadents. Their poetry was characterized by vivid imagery, intricate symbolism, and a deep appreciation for beauty and nature. Swinburne's works, for instance, often explored themes of love, melancholy, and the supernatural with a rich, ornate language. Morris, both a poet and an artist, emphasized craftsmanship and the integration of art into everyday life, while the Rossettis focused on romantic and mythological subjects with lyrical grace. These poets championed the idea that art should transcend utilitarian purposes, paving the way for the Decadent movement's emphasis on aestheticism and sensory experience. The Decadents and art for art's sake. By the 1890s, a new wave of poets emerged who fully embraced the principles of aestheticism, championed by Walter Pater, who advocated for art's sake. This philosophy prioritized beauty and sensory pleasure over moral and social themes, allowing poets to explore more personal and abstract subjects without the constraints of societal expectations. Ernest Dowson and Lionel Johnson were at the forefront of this movement, forming the Rhymers Club alongside other poets including young W.B. Yeats. The Decadents sought to create poetry that was meticulously crafted, focusing on musicality of language and the beauty of form rather than on substantive content. Their works often featured elaborated metaphors, rich alliterations, and a heightened emphasis on sound and rhythm, creating an otherworldly and ethereal quality. Ernest Dowson and Lionel Johnson, pillars of the Rhymers Club. Ernest Dowson, 1867 to 1900, and Lionel Johnson, 1867 to 1902, were two of the most prominent figures of the Rhymers Club, a collective that epitomized the Decadent movement's ideals. Dowson's poetry, including pieces like Cynara and Non Sum Qualis Eram, embodied the melancholy and fleeting beauty that defined Decadent aesthetics. His work often reflected personal loss and nostalgia, rendered through a delicate and ornamental style. Lionel Johnson, known for his spiritual and introspective poetry, contributed works such as By the Statue of King Charles and The Dark Angel. Johnson's poetry delved into themes of inner conflict and the quest for artistic perfection, using a refined and elaborate language that emphasized aesthetic beauty over emotional depth. Despite their artistic achievements, the Rhymers Club faced criticism for prioritizing form over substance. Critics argued that their focus on aesthetic ornamentation often overshadowed meaningful content, rendering their poetry superficial and detached from the pressing social issues of their time. This perception contributed to the group's limited lasting impact, as their works were seen as more concerned with stylistic elegance than with conveying profound or relevant messages. W.B. Yeats and the transition to vital poetry. W.B. Yeats, initially a member of the Rhymers Club, represented the evolution of decadent poetry into a more mature and substantial form. As Yeats matured, his poetry began to reflect a deeper engagement with Irish identity, mythology, and personal introspection. Moving away from the purely ornamental style of the Decadents, Yeats incorporated rich symbolic imagery and explored complex themes such as nationalism, spirituality, and the human psyche. His works, including The Lake Isle of Innisfree and The Second Coming, demonstrate a blend of aesthetic beauty with profound thematic exploration, signaling a shift towards a more vital and meaningful poetic expression. Yeats's transformation exemplifies how the decadent movement paved the way for modernist poets to retain aesthetic sophistication while addressing broader and more significant themes. His ability to balance artistic form with substantive content allowed him to transcend the limitations of decadent poetry, establishing himself as a central figure in the transition to modernist literature. The emergence of a more vital outlook. Bridges, Kipling, and Masefield. As the decadent movement began to wane, a new generation of poets emerged who sought to infuse English poetry with greater energy and relevance. W.B. Yeats, now fully matured, and Robert Bridges exemplified this shift towards a more dynamic and positive poetic outlook. Bridges, who served as the Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom from 1913 to 1930, brought a scholarly elegance to his poetry, balancing form with intellectual depth. Rudyard Kipling, another significant figure, introduced a vigorous and vibrant style into English poetry. His works, such as the Barrack Room Ballads, combined narrative storytelling with rhythmic vigor, capturing the adventurous and often harsh realities of colonial life. Kipling's poetry was marked by its directness and robust energy, offering a stark contrast to the ornamental style of the Decadents. John Masefield further advanced this new poetic vitality with works like The Everlasting Mercy, which blended realism with emotional intensity. Masefield's narrative approach and engaging storytelling infused English poetry with a fresh and racy vigor, making it more accessible and relevant to contemporary audiences. These poets bridged the gap between the aesthetic focus of the Decadents and the emerging modernist movement, contributing to a more balanced and impactful poetic landscape. Legacy and critique of the Decadents. The decadent movement, while often criticized for its emphasis on form over substance, played a crucial role in the evolution of modern poetry. By prioritizing aesthetic beauty and ornamental language, the Decadents expanded the boundaries of poetic expression, encouraging poets to experiment with form and sound. The focus on art for art's sake laid the groundwork for later movements that valued both form and meaningful content, such as modernism. However, the Decadents' detachment from social and political themes limited their long-term impact. Their poetry, though artistically refined, was often perceived as superficial and disconnected from the pressing issues of their time. This critique underscores the importance of balancing aesthetic pursuits with substantive content to create poetry that resonates deeply with audiences. Despite these criticisms, the Decadents' contributions to the poetic form and their influence on subsequent poets cannot be overlooked. Their commitment to beauty and sensory experience enriched English and Irish literature, providing a counterpoint to the more utilitarian and realist trends of the era. The movement's legacy lies in its ability to demonstrate that poetry can be both aesthetically pleasing and intellectually engaging, paving the way for future generations to explore this delicate balance. Conclusion: the Decadent movement of the 1890s marked a unique and transformative period in English and Irish literature. Emerging from the ornate and emotive poetry of the Pre-Raphaelites, Swinburne, Morris, and the Rossettis, the Decadents embraced the philosophy of art for art's sake, prioritizing aesthetic beauty and ornamental language over moral and social concerns. Poets like Ernest Dowson and Lionel Johnson, through the Rhymers Club, exemplified this commitment to form, though often at the expense of substantive content. As the movement progressed, figures like W.B. Yeats, Bridges, Rudyard Kipling, and John Masefield introduced a more dynamic and vital outlook, blending aesthetic sophistication with greater thematic depth and relevance. This transition not only challenged the limitations of decadent poetry, but also laid the groundwork for the emergence of modernist literature, which sought to balance artistic form with meaningful expression. While the Decadents may have forced criticism for their focus on ornamentation and perceived triviality, their contributions significantly enriched the poetic landscape of the modern age. By pushing the boundaries of poetic form and emphasizing beauty and sensory experience, the Decadents influenced a generation of poets to explore new stylistic possibilities and thematic complexities. Their legacy endures in the continued appreciation of aesthetically refined poetry that also engages with profound human experiences, ensuring that the Decadent movement remains a pivotal chapter in the history of English and Irish literature. So this was the discussion on the modern age and the decadence of English poetry. We will meet in the next video and discuss some other topic. Until then, goodbye and thank you.